Hello, I'm Dr. Andrew Sargent. Welcome to my course, 101 Most Misunderstood Verses. We're coming to you today from Sacred Fire Church in Bellevue, Florida. Come on by.
So let's talk about this because it's 7 white cords made of linen, 1 wool cord called teklet. And the question that we're going to ask ourselves is, does the word teklet actually mean blue? Does it mean a color? Is it a color word at all? Would you take a piece of glass that was the exact same color of a teklet garment and call it teklet?
No, because
No.
it's from the dye.
It's from the dye. That's right. It has to do with the dye. All right, so Brown, Driver, and Briggs will translate teklet as violet or bluish purple. NIV and KJV, blue. RSV, blue and purple. NASB wavers between violet, blue, and purple. Septuagint has a special word for it. All purple. Ta-da! All right, it's like an old purple. It's this like purple! Ta-da! Right. Now, when the LXX references at other places, they use other words that suggest that it's the color of the hyacinth stone. Yeah. And from the ancient world, the descriptions of this stone are from reddish orange, deep red, sapphire blue, to deep blue, sometimes verging on black. According to Bullard, these Greek terms refer to stones of a variety of colors among the zircon family. So the yellow, blue, orange, red, and everything in between. So here are the various stones. So this is the Septuagint. It uses these words, the words for describing the color of these stones. And so we see purple, we see red, we see blue-red, we see bright blue like the sky. We have regular purple, deep blue, deep red, orange, yellow, brownish red. And these are all, this is the words that the Septuagint's trying to get to the feel of what this thing is. So the RSV translates the Greek words in the Greek words as sapphire. The New English Bible calls it turquoise. And Martin Luther translated it gelb, yellow. Now, this word shows up about 50 times. Only 6 or 7 are not temple related. And I say 6 or 7 because it really depends how you interpret numbers 15. If you believe that number 15 is temple related, then only 6 times is it not temple related. But if you don't see it as temple related, then 7 times. But I believe it is temple related. It has to do with who they are, their identities. So this color, this teklet, this color, it always occurs, I call them the triplets. It's 3 of these colors that come together. So you have argamum, which we typically translate purple. We have tolot shani, otherwise known as shiny tolot. It can be one or the other, go in either direction. Some people are arguing that depending on which comes first, it changes the color. Maybe that is true in later times, but in earlier times, I don't even think we're dealing with color. We're dealing with a dye. And depending on how you treat that dye, you get all kinds of colors. So there are 50 occurrences. Of these 50 occurrences of teklet, 29 are combined with toloshani, and 31 are combined with argamum. These 3 go together. They're all part of one little kit and package of these elaborate, what I want to say is royal priestly colors. Elaborate. Okay, so where do we find teklet not in a temple context? Okay, because remember when we're in the temple, they're going to have curtains of this color and then woven into them are in white, which is going to be linen. Oh, isn't that shatnaz? Yeah. The whole tabernacle, the whole temple is shatnaz. Which begs the question of why you're not supposed to use it.
Yeah.
And yet commanded to use it. Commanded not to use it in one breath, commanded to wear it in the other breath. But the context of your being commanded to wear it is specific. And so maybe it's the context of wearing it that tells you why you're told not to wear it. Which will make it what? It will make it special. So we have this, I forget if it was Nero or Caligula who had one of the senator's wives stripped naked at a party and made her stay at the party, by the way, because she came in purple. And how dare she?
Oh.
How dare she? Purple's his. Purple's what marks him out. If you've ever seen The Last Emperor, They have the royal sacred yellow for the emperor. And he gets angry that his little brother comes to visit him, and his brother is wearing yellow, and he demands that he take it off and not wear it. And he's a spoiled little brat boy, and he doesn't want anybody else wearing yellow because that's his color. And these are special colors. So the chances are that this is a priestly combination. These things, these linens, interwoven with these wool, dyed in the juices that make them the triplets, arguing which I need to allot and teklet. All right, so it's used to describe royal hangings in Esther 1:6, royal apparel in 8:15, the clothing of the gods in Jeremiah 10:9, of Assyrian rulers in Ezekiel 23, and the wealthy personification of Tyre in Ezekiel's prophecy in Jeremiah 27. So we see this tension emerging in scriptures of these three colors, but they're not colors. They're actually color words today. They're not color words then. They're dye words, but we're going to wrestle with that. So we see a tension emerging in the symbolism of these colors in their royal imagery versus their temple imagery. All right. So many take bold typological interpretations of the colors in the Bible based on their own sense of color association. So all these color words become part of our 101 because they're commonly misunderstood as color words instead of dye words. And we then turn around and make meaning associations based on what we think about these colors and what we imagine about these colors. So we translate one of them scarlet, and that's blood of Jesus. We translate one of them purple, and that's royalty. We translate the other one blue, and that's the color of the sky. So it means divinity. You're like, no, not exactly. All three of them are triplets for a reason. They are all bound together. And the cheapest of them, supposedly, the cheapest of them is the teklet. But we'll get that. All right. So this is not new. It's not new for us to read these words, see the way they're translated, and for us to take them. Why would we not take them as color words? They're translated as color words. So what are you going to sit there and... I'm not trying to make fun of people or slap people in the head or anything like that. It's translated as color words. How else are you going to translate it? You can imagine trying to be a translator, huh?
No, I can't.
You're translating this, and you're like, what do we do? How do you translate a teklet cord, or an argamum garment, or shani tolo shawl? How do you translate that? Because the minute you translate it, you have to make an interpretive decision. But do you just leave it? There are other words, like a lot of scholars did not want to translate, when they were doing the New American Standard, they didn't want to translate the word hesed.
Why?
Because if you give it a translation, there's no equal translation. So if you give it a translation, you're giving it a lesser meaning. You're narrowing the English reader's ability to understand the word because you put it in familiar words, but those familiar words don't do it. Like, how are you going to translate Elohim or El or Eloah? You translated gods. If you translated gods, it sends the English reader in the wrong direction. If you don't translate it at all, they have to ask a question. But when they're originally reading, they don't have an answer to that question, so they have to wrestle with it. So you always have the problem that when you start translating something, you have to make interpretations. And the minute you make interpretations, you run the risk of introducing new ideas that are not possible. In other words, English may do something with that word that the Hebrew word does not do. But it also limits possibilities because there are meanings that the Hebrew word has that are broader than what the English word has, as we talked about when we did the word God. We translate Elohim God, and then we take the English sense of the word God and put it onto the word Elohim, and we just pull it. Because the word Elohim, the El, Eloah, Elohim words are much broader than what's going on in our English word God. It's different than what's going on in our word God. So the minute you translate it, you've automatically thrown something out of balance because you have to make a choice. So how are we going to translate these words? If I say they're not colors but dyes, and yet the dyes have a general leaning to be a certain color, but the minute I translate them according to that color, I give the false impression that these words are color words when they're dye words. So how do you handle that? In Hebrew, it works naturally because they have these categories. We don't have the categories. Now we have lots of color categories, which they do not. The Hebrews are sparse on color words. And these are not even among the color words, although they do represent certain colors. We're going to talk about that. So it's not that there are no colors, because obviously these things have a color, and they have a excitement because of the color, the brightness, the brilliance, the wonderfulness of the color. Look at that. Oh my goodness. She's spectacular. You got a candy apple red Lamborghini goes rolling by. And you just like, woo! Look at that baby. All right, so they have an impression. They do have color, but is the color consistent? I don't think it is. All right, so part of the difficulty in terms taken as color names is created by the scarcity of the ancient words for color and a lack of precision in their use and their production. Their colors were few. Their words for colors were few. And when my son was 2 years old, he didn't talk a lot. He was refraining from committing himself to the language until he felt that he had a sense of language. He understood that there were things about the language that he did not quite have a grasp on. So he went from practically saying single words to talking in full sentences when he finally decided that he'd figured out how it's all supposed to go.
He had a grasp.
Then he starts going blah, 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 blah. But when he was 2 and he was still kind of not saying much, you could take a big bucket of crayons and you could say, Ben, find me the hazy red magnolia blue. He was reading the crayons. He knew what the words were, and he had a massive color vocabulary, but he wasn't even talking. But he just knew what they were, and he'd find them. That's not the way it was in the ancient world. Their language for color was not precise. They didn't have this massive color vocabulary. You ever see the commercial, I love it, where it's a toothpaste commercial, and the teacher's trying to get them to say white, and she goes, "What color are my teeth?" Someone goes, "A crow, off-white, beige." And you go to the paint store, and there are like 50 types of off-white.
Oh, really?
You don't find that kind of stuff. If you read and it says white, his hair was white like wool. Well, have you seen wool?
Yeah.
It's not super white.
No.
It's kind of dingy gray. Not super white. But to them, it's white.
It's white. Yeah.
It's white. Well, just it's not our fault that we have white and off-white and slightly off-white and slightly more off-white and tea.
Well, yeah. There's
Well, the colors, they're a dye, so they wouldn't always be the same color.
They're not going to be the same color. That's the thing. It's how you treat a dye. So since they're dye words, we're going to talk about where they come from in a minute, but since they're dye words, how you treat that dye, how much concentration you use with it, what you mix with it, how long you soak the stuff in the dye, what you do to the materials afterwards. Is it exposed to sunlight? Is it mixed with salt? Is it kept in the dark? Is it soaked for an hour? Is it just dipped quickly? That you're going to get a different type of concentration. And when you're mixing it with different things, like should we put in a little lemon juice? Should we put in a little this? Put in a little that? How about some vinegar? You're going to get something that's radically different in color. And so this is what we're going to see. Is that when people talk about these colors, that these colors are changing their shade, changing their hue radically, but still being called by the same thing because they come from the same source. It's the same dye. All right, so colors were few. Their interest was more about brightness and darkness than with a particular hue. They had a different idea of what goes and doesn't go. So if you go into certain cultures, like African cultures or Puerto Rican cultures, you will look at their clothing. If you go down to Mexico or India, they have a different sense of color. And what we have a sense of, well, am I mixing my warms with my winters? You know, what are my cool colors, my warm colors? No, forget about all that. Bright and bold, all together. Neon yellow, neon green, neon purple. Take your car and paint your one fender purple and the other fender violet and the other one green, the other one yellow. Make the hood a completely different color. And people will look at it and think, that looks awesome. That is awesome. We're wearing all these colors and all they are is just screaming, look at me, I'm bright. And there's no sense of matching or not matching because they have a different sense and a different appreciation for how color works. Well, the same thing happens in the ancient world. That's the way it goes. So James Patch carries on an interesting discussion concerning the ancient Near Eastern concept of color, claiming that their great attraction to bright colors with a little sense of fitness or precise color distinction survives to this day. That's what it's basically getting at. That even to this day. Now, this can make it difficult for you if you are not trained to distinguish colors. You just look at 10 different colors and you say, they're all blue. But we're operating in a scientific field, perhaps doing mold investigations, where being able to distinguish exactly what kind of blue it is important. They actually will struggle with this. If you speak Chinese and you're accustomed to the sing-song, to the tonal elements up and down, do I lilt up, do I lilt down, do I do this? I can't even hear the difference. So I had a friend of mine trying to say one of our mutual friends' names. And I go, Mattoon. And he's going, I don't know anybody by the name of Mattoon. Of course you do. He's one of your professors. Oh, you mean Mattoon?
That sounds like
I'm sorry.
purposely asking.
Mattoon and Mattoon? Are you serious? I can barely hear the difference. But they hear the difference. Because just like we see the difference between a crew and Off-White, we see it, we know it, we've been trained to pay attention to it. And so the same thing happens. How you're taught to think about things and pay attention to and the labels you give, you can be disadvantaged in one environment. You can go over to a scientific field where having a rich color vocabulary and the ability to intentionally distinguish between them, as opposed to being unable to distinguish between them. And it happens from culture to culture. Can I hear that sound? Can I understand that you just did something, just that little thing there, and that little thing changes the meaning of the word? That's the way it is with color. So the modern American's natural sense of color is not sufficient aid in interpreting any term translated as a familiar color in the Bible. It doesn't matter what we think it means. You've got the people that are like, I think I've told the story before. We go to this replica of the tabernacle, and this woman is going through the tabernacle, and the gold represented something different every time. The gold edging on this meant that, but the gold edging on this other thing meant this other thing, and this gold edging over here. She kept changing the meanings of the gold. She kept changing the meanings of the blue. She kept changing the meanings of the purple. She kept doing everything, and everything was this hyper symbolism. And she was like a fruity kind of.
Sounds like a hippie chick.
Yeah, like a hippie chick. But it's this kind of like hyper fixation. Our sense of things doesn't matter. What were their sense of things? So even if you could identify the color, it's not likely that they meant the same thing by then we do. In fact, I know that they didn't. So it's essential to look for the textual clues from the Bible, societal clues from the ancient Near East, before you jump to a natural conclusion to things that are anything but natural. Now, there's a good reason to believe that Argamum, Teklet, and Tolot Shiny or Shiny Tolot are not colors at all in the same American sense of color, but rather a source of dye is applied to cloth. See, it's not even just the dye, it's dye is applied to cloth. In other words, what do you call the dye when it's just dye? And do you call it something different when it's cloth soaked in that dye? So I take wool and I soak it in this, and I call it shiny tolot. Or I take wool and I soak it in this, and I call it teklet. I take wool and I soak it in this, and I call it. So you don't separate them. They're one. It's wool dyed in, wool dyed like, wool dyed, and it's not specifically color, but it's sourcing. And the sourcing is all important. We all recognize that rich people take anything exclusive and grab a hold of it, even if it's ugly as death. Really ugly stuff. One of my favorite moments as a child, because we would go, my parents, my grandparents, and my father was raised in Newport, Rhode Island. Our family came to Newport, Rhode Island in the late 1800s. My grandfather was born there in 1910. So every Sunday, we'd go to see my grandparents. And my grandparents' house was not the most exciting place in the world. The adults would talk, and they always watched the news, and they watched 60 Minutes. So I would occasionally watch 60 Minutes because I had nothing better to do with my life, even though I was dying of boredom. And as I would tell my own children, boring people are bored. And Andy Rooney is on from 60 Minutes.
Let us to love him.
And I remember he says, so I just got back from the Paris fashion shows. Ugly is in this year. And as a little kid, I thought that was the funniest thing I ever heard. I howled with laughter. I couldn't stop laughing. I thought it was the funniest thing I ever heard. And ugly is in this year. But you've got these people, they're just, because it's exclusive. So these dyes are measured in their value by their exclusivity. Now they're also good. So they're rich, they're bright, they're steadfast. Like, in other words, they stay, and they stay good. You don't take these dyes and put them in things that can't hold them, right? You don't waste your time taking an expensive dye and putting it on something that can't hold dye. So the wool really held the dye. So that's why it's always being saturated in wool. Expensive dyes, exclusive, drawn from difficult processes, makes it valuable because the average man can't get their hands on it. And because the average man can't get their hands on it, rich people want it, simply because other people can't afford it. All right, so as I said, something that matched the exact. So if I took a wool and I soaked it in tacklet so that it becomes tacklet, wool soaked in that dye, tacklet, and I took that tacklet and then I made a piece of glass or plastic and put it next to it, and it's the exact same color. Today, I might still call it tacklet in modern Hebrew because they use the word for blue, and it's been disassociated from its source as a dye. But in religious circles, they will not accept it. It's either taken from that source or it's not real. Just if I could get some berries in the forest, and the berries would make my wool look close to that color or identical to one of the colors that it might make, it still would not be tacklet. It's the source that matters. So you are forbidden in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the collection of Jewish oral laws. You are forbidden to wear imitations. It would actually be a sacrilege to wear an imitation, to wear a fake. You know, imagine this. You're getting married, and your fiance presents you with a 3-carat diamond ring, and you find out that it's cubic zirconium. How do you feel about that?
Not happy.
But it looks exactly the same.
It looks the same, I know.
It looks exactly, but you're not happy about it because it's cheap. You got me something cheap.
Yep.
And even though it looks exactly the same and it's just as sparkly,
Yep.
doesn't matter. It's not the real thing.
Besides, you lied to me about it.
That's right. You omitted that.
What if he said, "I got you this beautiful zirconia,
Yeah.
cubic zirconia"? Right?
What did it say?
Oh, seriously? Really? All right, now, lessons for all you people out there. When you go to get married and your fiance has a 1/2-carat diamond on their hand and says, "Oh, I don't know, Andrew," unless your name's something else, "it looks kind of big on my hand. I think maybe I'd like to get this tiny one over here." Don't believe her. She's lying to you. I found out that she was annoyed that after telling me that the 1/2-carat one was way too expensive, and she just it just would feel awkward because her delicate little hands, and maybe she should take this other one, that I was supposed to say, "Oh, no, darling, you are worth every penny. You take the 1/2-carat one, I insist." Don't believe her. She's lying. She will bring it up 10 years later as a point of you not really loving her.
Oh, jeez.
No lookalikes. So a range of colors were produced under the biblical argamum, teklet, and shani, but they were all deemed to be varieties of red. Purple, especially this all purple, was the perfect red. And they could range from being violet, light blue, reddish blue, all the way to being jet black, purpley jet black, that's the color. What happens to blood?
It dries black.
It dries black. Dark brown if it's thin, black if it's concentrated. So these are like the perfect colors. They are meant to represent blood. Okay, so the pagan importance of red centers around 3 separate ideas. Red's the color of blood. They consider red the sun, the color of the sun. Now we call the sun what?
Yellow.
Yellow. So what's one of the potential colors of these dyes if you treat the garment a certain way? Yellow. It has a wide range. Okay, it's also the color of fire. And we would call fire can be blue if it's really hot. Orange. Reddish, depending on the heat that we're dealing with. Blood, which is focused on the sacrificial elements of connecting with your God. The color of the sun, which is the image of healing and fertility. And the energy of holiness, which is fire itself. Now, we think of the sun as fire. Whether they knew it was fire or not. They knew it gave out heat. Right? But the union between the worshiper and the God through the ingesting and the wearing of sacrificial animal stands behind many of the cultural symbols that seem disconnected to a modern reader. Okay, so here you are. You come before your God, and you're going to offer up an animal in sacrifice. And so what do? This animal stands between you and your God. The God gets part, you get part. And the statement used to be, that which is in you is in me, and we are made one through it. That which is in you is in me, and we are made one through it. You come and you eat from my table. I take one leg of the chicken, you take the other leg of the chicken, and we take the fat of the chicken and burn it as a sacrifice to God. And you and I have made a covenant before the God, because that which is in you is in me, and we were made one by it. They have the story of the ancient one who you were given 3 days if you ate from a man's table. And if you did, among the Bedouins, so if you did no harm to the person within the covenant period, then you were righteous to the covenant. But you could, in certain Bedouin communities, kill a stranger just for being a stranger. So they had this guy who killed his friend. And when they were called to him before the tribunal, you went and killed your friend. He says, I have not eaten from his table for X amount of time. And the judge said, you have eaten at his table so often, for so long, that the fat of your belly is his table. And they executed him for it, held him accountable for it. But had you been a stranger and you ate a meal with me for an evening, you got 3 days of protection from me. But this guy's like, you are always eating his table. So you've got this animal, and you cut off the skull of the animal, and you put it on the god. That's why you always see gods wearing horns. That's why you see the Vikings coming out wearing horns. It's the image. You would cut off the skull with the horns and literally just wear it like a skull cap. You take the blood and you'd put it on the idol, or you'd pour it at the feet of the idol. You'd take the fat and you'd burn it in smoke before the idol. And then you'd eat the meat. You didn't just eat the meat. What else did you do? You took the skin of the animal and you made a garment out of it. And because it's a sacrificial animal, that is a sacred garment. Now, so what's another way? Take the wool of the animal, make it into string or cloth, and then dye it in the colors of sacrificial blood. And it begins to symbolically represent. So you replace the fake, you use these colors, shiny tolo, teklet, and argamum, to symbolically replace actual blood, which would smell bad after a while.
Yeah,
But it still carries the same symbolism. Because remember, this is sympathetic magic. You're working with symbols as replications of realities. The enactment of symbols shape reality, affect reality. I do this, and I have a corresponding effect in the real world. I move the god through this sacrifice, and it impacts my crops. And I go to the temple prostitute, and I engage in fertile activity, and the gods of fertility are empowered to make the crops grow. Pagan world. But that which starts in pagan world bleeds over into just the pure symbolism. You remember I just said, in modern times, teklet is blue. That's not what it meant then. Things change, things develop. When the modern Hebrew says teklet, is he thinking about sacrificial blood? No, undoubtedly not. It's probably drifted too far afield from that for it to be a common part of it. You could go almost to anything we do, and it has some origins in some really weird thing. And the way we use it traditionally has no real connection to its origins. I'm going to say something super controversial. Ready? I don't celebrate Halloween. And I know that a lot of people that are super sensitive to the activities of witches and the demonic and warlocks, and I've met people that are actually into that kind of stuff, minister the gospel to people that are into that kind of stuff, that they take it seriously and it's real. But I also recognize that kids and their parents are having a social good time, dressing up as weird characters and going door to door and getting candy, and not one of them makes any real meaningful association with its origins among the Druids or anything like that. And so you have this question, am I doing anything wrong when kids come to my house? I don't go out trick-or-treating. I didn't go out trick-or-treating as a kid. We did for a little while, and then my parents kind of stopped having us do it. But I'm not going to sit there and say that everybody that does it is participating and taking in the work of the devil and opening themselves up to the devil. They're just having a good time, dressing up and getting candy and walking the streets together and joking around. And there's this disconnect that you can have for something. Now, a lot of people will disagree. And I think anything that comes closer to the demonic, and I recognize that there's it always tends to focus on death and spooky and scary and all that kind of stuff. So I mean, I get it. I'm just not that freaked out about it. I don't celebrate it, but I'm not freaked out. And I always have a bowl of candy in case little kids come ringing my doorbell. And I'm not going to open the door and say, "You sons of the devil, get your wicked feet off the stoop of my holy house." No, I'm going to walk up and say, "Ooh, you're a scary vampire." And I'm going to give them some candy because they're just trying to have a little fun. That's my 2 cents on it. But I recognize that a lot of people don't feel that way. And I think a person needs to act within their conscience. Because to act against conscience, as Martin Luther said, to act against conscience is neither right nor safe. So follow your conscience. And don't let me lure you into something you're uncomfortable with. All right, so you've got this connection between the worshiper that literally, I eat the sacrifice. I wear the sacrifice. I wear garments dyed in the color of the blood of the sacrifice. And I am thereby bound to my God, coming under the protection of his power, walking in his oversight. That's what we're doing. So symbolism tended to replace reality, so we're no longer wearing actual sacrificial blood, but these colors still represent this. It's considered the colors of power. If you've seen the movie Gladiator, when he's going out to the one particular ring, I think it's the one where he kills all these guys and he starts going, "Are you not entertained?" Because he's disgusted by what he's being made to do. "Are you not entertained?" Just before he goes into that, one of the really big dudes that begins to serve him, they walk under these cloths and they're all dripping with red dye. And they get it all over themselves. They have to walk through the cloths. And the big dude turns around and goes, "Ah, red, the color of the gods. We are blessed today with the protection of the gods. We will overcome today." It's perfect. It's exactly what it is. You're literally wearing the symbol of divine protection, rightness with your God. So Bourne says of the pagans, the conception of this most vivid of all colors was bound up with magic. Again, among the pagans. With ideas of fertility, of safety from demons, and of power. He who goes in purple wins power over men and spirits. So now we have the symbol of those. Of the many reds named for their sources, none were so important as the triples. I like the way that, of the many reds named for their sources. So they are not color words, but they do, when treated certain ways, produce incredibly distinctive colors that had representative value in terms of their connection to the sacrificial animal and the wearing of the sacrificial animal. So when you're wearing a wool garment, you are wearing a garment made from the hair of a sacrificial animal. I'm not saying they didn't shear their sheep, but that's what they were. Right?
So what about that robe that you just wore? The purple robe.
I am surprised, and I'd be curious if it was true arganum. It seems like a silly thing to do with expensive garment.
No, wasn't it supposed to be expensive?
Yes, it is supposed to be an expensive garment. It is. And they don't tear it. Right. They don't tear it. But it's going to be messed up by the time he's done wearing it. So they take it and they cast lots for it because they didn't want to split it up. They didn't want to rip it up or have anything damaging happen to it. It's supposed to be nice. So somebody who thinks they're funny takes this incredibly expensive garment to put it on him in order to mock him all the deeper for being a royal, the king of the Jews. All right. So shiny tolot, teklet, and argama, of all the available sources of red, purple, are of a particular interest for both kings and priests because they are color fast, strikingly attractive, and extremely expensive, thus quite exclusive. People like the exclusive. They don't want cheap imitations. In fact, it's considered, if you get caught wearing a knockoff, if you're supposed to be this handsy-dancy, richy person, and you get caught wearing a knockoff,
Oh, you're done.
oh my goodness.
Shamed.
Whoa.
Yes.
Unbelievable. No knockoffs. All right. So they're reserved for the royal and religious purposes. Because you had to have a lot of money to get your hands on them. But they were reserved for the royal and religious purposes, specifically because they were the garments of the gods, making the wearing of them an essentially religious act. Tolot shani is made from the body and excretions of the female Coccus illysus, a shield louse, fond of oak trees. I'm a shielder. I'm a shield louse. I'm fond of oak trees and long walks in the moonlight. Argamon is made from the mucus glands of the carnivorous snail Bolinus murex brendaris. And Teclit is made from the same mucus glands of a different kind, the Truncularia. That's quite a word. Trunculareopsis murex trunculus variety. So the louse have to be gathered and picked out through oak trees, but these snails have to be dived for in the Mediterranean. And they come from different locations. They're found in different ways. They exist at different depths. It's hard to get them, and most of the year you can't get them. In part of the year, they're hiding under the sand. In part of the year, the seas are too rough to dive for them, and so you have a limited window to get them. It takes 12,000 snails to make 1.4 ounces of pure dye.
Wow.
That's enough for one band around an outer garment. 12,000 snails. So you've got the manpower that's needed, the manpower of extraction, manpower of...
When do you think they discovered all this? How early did they discover it?
Well, this stuff they've known for a long time. But we have this idea in modern times, and the academics often push it, that ancient people were stupid.
Oh, no.
You've heard people like, I ain't going to read a book from people who thought the earth was flat. Okay. You do realize that pretty much everybody knew that the world was round
Long time ago.
over half a millennium
Easy.
before Jesus came along. We had a Greek guy who, there was this well, it's deep. And because it's so deep, they knew that one day a year the sun shone directly down it at exactly high noon, one day a year. And so he walked a certain number of miles on that day, drove a stick in the ground, and at exactly noon on that day, he measured the shadow of the stick. He then took the distance from the well to his stick as a certain curvature. He then multiplied that until he got 360 and discovered the circumference of the earth within a couple hundred miles.
Yeah. Look at their math skills from way back.
They built pyramids.
Yeah.
They're not stupid people.
No.
Part of the lie that we get told, because what do we get told as Americans? Maybe you guys got taught this in school, like I did. Christopher Columbus is the one who discovered the earth was round.
No.
You weren't taught that?
No. Well, maybe. I don't know.
It's going back so long.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
It's not much longer than mine.
Yeah.
We were taught that. Christopher Columbus is the one. The sailors didn't want to go with him because they were afraid they were going to sail off the edge of the earth. Not true, not true, not true. In fact, sailors knew that the earth was round long before most people knew the earth was round, because they knew that the bottom of the ship disappeared sooner than the sails. And when you're out at sea, you can see the slight curvature of the earth. So they anticipated when they saw a ship go out and bung them that the ship would be like this, and then all of a sudden part of the ship would be missing. You would see the sails. So they anticipated that there's a curvature here. So they knew the earth was round. So, but we were taught all this kind of nonsense because it's particularly Marxist to discredit the past, to hate the people of the past, to present the people of the past as stupid. So you look for some moral failing in them. Our first president owned slaves. Our first president inherited slaves, which he was not legally permitted to free, but having no children and no inheritor for his property, he left his property and freedom to all the servants in his house.
Can't talk about that part.
Because but he could not set them free. Thomas Jefferson did not have that liberty. Thomas Jefferson was against slavery profoundly, and his first version of the Declaration of Independence, which he penned, and in the original versions of the Constitution and other documents, Jefferson wanted to put anti-slavery messages in there, and they were edited out because they believed that the Southerners would not join the Union if they thought they were going to immediately lose their slaves. And they needed the unity in order to stabilize the nation. But the goal was from the beginning to get rid of slavery.
Or sure, they were like, yeah, we'll get back to that. Just leave it out for now. We'll get back to it.
Yeah, we'll get back to it.
Yeah.
Well, they turn a lot of things around. Like one of the things the left likes to throw around is this whole, they believe that a black person was only 3/5 of a person. Not true. The 3/5 compromise was that the Southerners did not want their slaves to be treated as human beings until it came time for representation in the House of Representatives. That because you got a representative for ever so many people, they wanted their slaves to count. But the Northerners were like, if you don't regard them as people, then you cannot play it both ways. They're people or there are people. If you refuse to acknowledge that they're people, then they don't get to be counted in order to get legislative representation. So they compromised on 3/5. The compromise was put forward by those who wanted to weaken the power of the South so that they would lose their ability to legally protect themselves in their slavery. So the 3/5 compromise goal was by people who did respect the humanity of the slaves and was attempting to weaken the political power of those who did not recognize the humanity of the slaves. It's the exact opposite of what gets said. But it would take four snails. It would take 4 snails to make one cord for each of the 4 corners. So basically 1 snail for a cord, and then you've got 4 of them. So can you dive in the water and get 4 snails out? Can you take the little gland and make 1 cord? It's basically the idea is that anybody can afford it. So it put it within grasp. These are the ones that are easier to get. The argonums are harder to get, so the organism firmware does it. You vary the hue by varying the preparation of the dye, different agents, lemon juice, salt water, urine. Yes, they would pee into the dye.
Urine is used a lot.
You can also change the color by how you prepare it. You're cooking it, you're not cooking it, are you smearing it raw? I've read articles by people that were on the beaches and the kids were diving for these snails and simply smashing the whole snail, taking out the guts and then rubbing the guts, though, all of the guts, onto a cloth and then putting it out in the sun and then throwing salt water on it and then washing it off and then letting the sun bake it in. And he says they were getting bright, neon greens and incredible colors they were getting out of these snails. All right, you can even change it by how many males versus females you have to get this effect or that effect. The wool's saturated for different amounts of times. You can dip it once, you can dip it twice. You can leave it dipping for longer. You can expose it to different amounts of light.
You suppose this whole dyeing thing was quite the empire? Passed down.
It was a business. Huge business, big business. The lady that has church in her house, the Apostle Paul goes to her house, and they're having church in her house. This is what she did. She was in the markets of making these garments for the wealthy. So we actually have some conversations from later Jews who describe color, who describe teklet as the color of the grass, of trees, of the sea, of the sky. For the colored shade continually shifts from yellow to green, then blue, and ending in violet, as far as various descriptions go. We've already talked about some of those. Even though it seems standard to expect black, red, purples from argamum, bluish purples and violets from teklet. So you do get a richer color or a different kind of color from the other ones. All right, so what we want to do is we want to dispense with the hyper-specific interpretations of these dye fabrics with distinct aspects of the work of Christ, separating the messaging of the triplets. In other words, we cannot sit there and say, the purple represents his royalty, the blue represents his divinity, the red represents his sacrifice. The triplets go together. They all represent his sacrificial act, his deity. They all represent all of those ideas. He is the King of the Jews. He is incarnate God. He is the sacrificial lamb, the Passover lamb. He is all of them. And it's not like, well, this one represents that, and this one represents this, and that one represents this. Is that they all represent sacrifice. They all represent the sacred bond that the wearer has with his God. They all represent that connection that's been made through the sacrificial animal. All of them together. They're triplets. They go together. They travel together. They're best buds. And you don't separate them. They stay together. So you don't want to be going around going, this one represents that. This one represents this. One makes me think of that. And that one makes me think of this. No. They're all God, kingship, sacrificial, spiritual power, connection, mercy, protection. All right. Ready? So they all represent a sacred bond and holiness. These are the colors of the gods. These are the colors of kings that are laying hold of divine promises of protection and sometimes divinity itself. These are the colors of priests who are holy to their gods and bear both the honor and responsibility of that position, which is why we're going to see it used this way when we're dealing in Numbers chapter 15. It's something for you to look at and to remember. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to remember to obey the covenants and the commands. So Exodus 19, 5 through 6 declares Yahweh's purpose for Israel and the ultimate significance of teklet in the tassel. It says, "Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." You know the song?
Angel.
You are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. And took you, people.
I've heard it.
You show forth the praises of him who has called you out of darkness, into his marvelous light, into his marvelous light.
Tickles, but I can't. Where music comes from.
I just grew up with it.
Like a Presbyterian song.
Yes.
You remember I step on.
Oh, sure.
It's why it's easier to memorize than the King James. King James's English is just beautiful, and it makes memorization easy because it all rings with this kind of loose poetry flair. It's beautiful. When I make comments with the King James only people, and I think King James only, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, are the flat earthers of the Christian community. Their position is pure ignorance, blithering, stubborn, belligerent ignorance. But that doesn't mean that I don't love the King James Bible. King James Bible is beautiful. It's got its advantages, but you should check every translation. Always compare, always contrast. So, Deuteronomy 7:6, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth." Isaiah 43:20, "The wild beasts will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, for I give water in the wilderness, rivers in the desert, to give drink to my chosen people." 1 Peter 2:9, which we just sang, "You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light." Don't miss that language, by the way. This light in the darkness. It is a creational statement. He called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. It is a recreation where he says, over you, let there be light. You were chaos. You were waste. You were tohu vabohu, nothingness and nothingness. And he spoke over you, let there be light. And there was light. It's powerful imagery. All right. Leviticus 19:19. "You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed, nor shall you wear a garment of cloth made from two kinds of material." That gets picked up in Deuteronomy 22:10. "You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear a cloth of wool and linen mixed together. You shall make yourself tassels on the four corners of the garment with which you cover yourself." So here you have two things happening and possibly at the same time. On the one hand, you don't wear shatnaz because it's part of a paradigm of teaching through the law. You're living out and working. You know how every morning you get up and you put on your tassel and you recite the Psalms? Well, every day when you're plowing your field, and when you're sowing your field, when you're reaping your field, when you're making garments, everything you do, you're saying to yourself, don't mix. You have to be careful. Don't let a believer mix in that kind of a oneness with an unbeliever. You can't be best pals with a pagan. You can't marry a pagan woman. You can't. You mustn't. It must not happen. You cannot bring foreigners in your midst and leave them practicing their sick religions. Must separate. And yet, at the same time, you have this idea that the shatnaz, the linen and wool mix, is the mix of the tabernacle. The tabernacle is a big, giant thing of shatnaz. It is linen and wool. All the angels that are stitched and the stars that are stitched into the wool of these curtains is a shatnaz. And so to wear it, to be told not to wear it, is to say it is a sacred mixer. And it's reserved for the temple and for the priest. And yet, every male shall have a piece of it on the corner of his garment, because they are priests to the Lord. So we say the hem is the mystical, symbolic extension of the man before his God. The tassel is an extension of what it says about that person. And we said, what does it say about that person? And here's what it is. Because it's the shatnaz, because it's the linen with the teklet, and it is attached to the hem, it says, priest of the Lord. Since every male wears it, so that every male is part of a kingdom of priests. Now there's still separations. You still don't get to go into the tabernacle and temple, but it's a little touch, just a little piece, just gives you that little bit of the temple to wear on yourself, so that you may look at it and remember, I'm holy to the Lord. I have an obligation as part of a holy people. I have an obligation, and I need to fulfill that obligation. So Delitzsch argues that the shatnaz command is yet another extension of priestly concern for separation of spheres and natural order, a concern woven into the fabric of everyday life through many such separations, like not mixing seeds, not mixing animals, not mixing cloth. Milgram, however, contends that this mixture was used only in the sanctuary and upon the priest's garments until the giving of the seat, and thus was a holy mixture banned from common life. Are both right? I think so. I think they're both right. I think both are happening at the same time.
If you like what you're hearing today, please subscribe below, and don't forget to share it on as many platforms as you can, and tell your friends to watch. Thank you.